There's something special about what I have for you here today because it captures Ace Frehley right in that sweet spot between legend and underdog. So it's 1990. Kiss is still out there breathing fire, but Ace is out on the road with a brand new band, proving he doesn't need makeup, pyros, or Gene Simmons to melt faces. I found this really cool article from April 2nd of 1990 in the Arizona Republic that you are going to love hearing. Because in this article, Ace Frehley is older, sharper, and ready to show the world that the Spaceman still has rocket fuel left. Backed by a killer lineup, guys from Frampton's band, Mountain, and Riot, Ace hit the road with a heavier sound and a fire that came straight out of the Bronx. Now, what makes this so great is hearing Ace reflect on how Kiss inspired a whole generation of kids who later formed bands like Skid Row, and how he's still out there doing what he loves, proving that rock and roll really does keep you young. So, as we dive into this one, I want to remind you that this is not a Kiss channel, although admittedly, we do a lot of Kiss content on a pretty regular basis. Just since we lost Ace, we thought it was time to make a few extra shows, spend a little bit of time talking specifically about Ace and Kiss, kind of like we did when Ozzy passed away. We spent a good week doing nothing but Ozzy and Black Sabbath content, so we're doing something similar here right now. And before we read this, if you like what we do here, if you wouldn't mind just going right down below there and clicking that subscribe button and the like button, I'd really appreciate it. All right, so here it is. Ace Frehley shows his mettle on tour. Guitarist brings beefed up sound lineup to Tempe. I'm still a kid, Ace Frehley says. Rock and roll keeps me young. Frehley was the original lead guitarist for Kiss for 10 years. He split with the band in 1983 and resurfaced on record as leader of Frehley's Comet in 1987. Although Kiss, known for bombastic stage shows rather than musicianship, why do they always have to say that? I mean, it's almost comical it's an unwritten rule that anytime somebody writes about Kiss, they say, well, they're really, really well known for the big show and not so much the musicianship. The guys, look, they weren't virtuosos on their instruments, but they were a tight rock and roll band. They just were, and they had good tunes. Anyway, it's like this obligatory thing that has to be thrown in anytime somebody writes an article about Kiss. It's so funny. Let's see, met with a good deal of critical resistance in the 70s. Frehley's guitar playing inspired about a zillion before-the-mirror air performers by kids who have since grown up, sort of, and gone on to form such bands as Skid Row. In fact, Sebastian Bach, Dave Sabo, and Richie Bolin of that group sang backup vocals on Frehley's current album. And at this point, he was, of course, on his third solo album, which they did. And they had been with Ace Frehley on Headbangers Ball. I think it was maybe 2 years before this. And it was really funny because they were on there with him singing Cold Gin. But the point that he makes here in this article when it says, inspired about a zillion before the mirror air performances, how many of you were just like me, and when you were little kids, you'd go down in your basement with your friend or whatever, and you'd put on a Kiss record, and you'd grab your tennis racket, and you would be Kiss, like he says here, in front of the mirror. You'd just be rocking out, and it did inspire people. I mean, I look back at my own life. I was a professional musician for several years, and I think if you were to really, really go back in the infancy of why I got into that world, it would have been this. It would have been that air guitar. It would have been listening to Ace. It would have been listening to Kiss and imagining myself performing. Now, Frehley's out touring as a solo act, or is he? Although he dropped the Frehley's Comet he's dropped the Frehley's Comet moniker, Frehley says, there's no big difference. There's two different people in the band, that's all. Basically, we're doing the same show we did before, except we include 6 tracks from the new album. Frehley must be tired of talking about it because the change of focus from band act to solo act was the focus of many articles in the hard rock and metal magazines when his latest album, Trouble Walkin', came out in late 1989. In fact, he does sound very tired as he calls in from a stop in Winston-Salem, North Carolina, on the tour that brings him to After the Gold Rush today. After all, being on the road is grueling. Quote, I don't have time to practice. Between traveling and interviews, if I get a chance to catch a nap, I'm lucky. Which I always think that's just so funny listening to that, because you've heard him say in interviews before, man, if I'd have known I'd have had such an influence on so many people, I'd have practiced more, which is hilarious hearing that. And you know, because again, he wasn't a virtuoso, but he just rocked. He had great tone. He knew how to handle that Les Paul. And yeah, it was a little bit sloppy, but you go back and listen to those studio recordings and even, well, Alive and Alive 2, the live stuff. He was great. He was great. The stuff he played was just perfect for that music. It was so tasty for the music that Kiss put together. Let's see here, catching up. Frehley, who also sings some, will be backed up by Richie Scarlet on guitar and vocals, John Regan on bass, and Sandy Slavin on drums. Now, I just learned something earlier, and I'll show you up here on the picture, because here's the picture of the band, and it says, touring with guitarist Ace Frehley, second from right, our bassist John Regan. And one thing I didn't realize until I started kind of working on this little article was that John Regan actually played with Peter Frampton years before joining this group with Ace Frehley. And then also, guitarist vocalist Richie Scarlet, another thing I didn't realize was that he had played with Mountain. He'd played with Leslie West. And I love Leslie West. He was such a cool guitarist. And then, of course, over here, there's Ace, second from the right, and then Sandy Slavin over on the right. And if you don't know who Sandy Slavin is, he's one of my personal rock and roll heroes, because he used to play with the band that I loved, and it was a band called Riot. And if you're not familiar with Riot, not Quiet Riot, Riot, they were this incredible, amazing band. And interestingly, when I saw Kiss for the first time, which was on the Lick It Up tour, Riot was supposed to open up, Riot, Vandenberg, and Kiss. And I was probably at the time, more excited to see Riot than anybody. I was such a big fan. And Sandy Slavin was the drummer. Anyway, real quick, after he was in Riot, he went off and he was with another band called Adam Bomb, actually a guy named Adam Bomb, who'd put out a solo album called Fatal Attraction. And if you've never heard it, or never heard of Adam Bomb, you need to listen to him. That album, Fatal Attraction, was pretty cool. It was a great tune. Or not great tune, it was a great album. And Sandy Slavin, who played here with Ace Frehley a couple of years before that, had actually been with this guy, Adam Bomb, touring with him. And I saw Adam Bomb in concert at a place in Denver, Colorado that held like 2,000 people. And I don't think there were 30 people at the concert. So I was right up on the front row with, and there's Sandy Slavin. Anyway, just kind of a cool little memory. But anyway, that's who Sandy Slavin is, by the way. All right, here, so Sandy Slavin on drums. Scarlet returned to Frehley's fold after departing from the original Comet lineup years ago. Regan was in Comet last time out, and Slavin hails from Riot, like I said, and played on one cut from Trouble Walkin'. Yeah, so on the album, which he was currently on here, it was still Anton Fig playing all this stuff, but Sandy Slavin apparently did play one song. Also doing percussion on one cut on the album was Peter Criss, who split from Kiss a few years before Frehley. Basically, this lineup allows Frehley to pursue a heavier sound that's in line with his Kiss days and the first Comet album. On Comet's 1988 album, Second Sighting, things were beginning to head toward a keyboard-oriented light metal. Something in the change must be working, because Frehley says the album, quote, is a lot more successful than my last album. For critics who may think Frehley's grease-painted antics in Kiss prove he values showmanship over musicianship, the Trouble Walkin' album features drumming by virtuosic Anton Fig, Frehley's original Comet drummer, and the rock-solid underpinning of the band on Late Night with David Letterman. Now again, the point here is, and we've done other videos about this where other critics have actually said Ace was definitely the guy that was the true musician in the band. Now that's arguable. You can say whatever you want to about that, but that's the way a lot of people saw him. And so, they kind of go into this and say, for the people that think that he was part of that theatrical thing, he was, but he actually surrounded himself, for example, with Anton Fig, these virtuoso musicians, because Ace himself was actually a really talented musician in his own right. Okay, so here we go. So don't try to tell the 39-year-old Frehley that his music is just for teenage boys in ground-pounding pickup trucks. Quote, the audience is a cross-section. I have older fans from my Kiss days and younger fans from the newer records, and everything works out fine. Most groups don't have the widespread age range that I have, unquote. And that may or may not be true. I don't know. I don't know if it was, but there is no doubt about it that there were next generation people that did kind of pick up on the Kiss stuff and then would go carry on with Ace. I don't know that they obviously didn't have the same power with younger people that they did back in the 70s, but they did do okay. And then when you start getting to the later days, especially when they did the reunion tour, well then of course you had the next generation, because of course what? all the older people now that could afford tickets want to take their kids to see Kiss. And then now the whole, the next generations move on. And now my son, I took him to see Kiss, on that final tour. And so he knows all about Kiss. So they did manage to have this really, really cross-generational impact that a lot of bands just don't have. Let's see, widespread range. And he doesn't feel he's too old for the heavy rock he plays. Quote, youth is the way you look at life in general. I've met people in their mid-20s who act older than I do. Youth is a state of mind as far as I'm concerned. The Rolling Stones are a perfect example of that. And what makes that so funny is that this article was from 1990. And he's making a comment about the age of the Rolling Stones. What is that? 35 years ago. Anyway, I find that just kind of hysterical. So anyway, I thought you'd enjoy that. Hey, follow the channel if you're not already following the channel. Like the video, share this with other people, and with that, have yourself a fantastic day.